black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know. I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun, grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage, all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. Gosh, got so many good guests. Man, it's cold outside. I just came in from outside. I guess it's that time of year. It's, I don't know, wherever you're at, I hope you're staying nice and warm because it's freaking cold outside. Thanks so much for listening to the show. I really appreciate you guys being here. Going to be talking to Jim, and Jim is a long-haul truck driver. He used to be in law enforcement, and he had 3 separate encounters over many years. And one of his encounters actually involved his truck, and he had sent me a picture of the truck after the creature hit it, and it looks like King Kong hit this truck. I'm not going to post the photo. I'm going to try and black out the company name just out of respect for Jim. But there was a lot of damage to the truck. Then we'll be talking to Mike, and Mike is actually current law enforcement down there in Mississippi, and he recently had an encounter that really shook him up. When he got out of his Tahoe, he was out doing an investigation, and one of these creatures stepped out in front of him, really shook this guy up. And then we'll wrap up with Shirley. Shirley had an encounter back in 1966 in California when she was 13 years old, 12 going on 13, when she was at camp, and one of these creatures had come through camp. Should be a great show tonight. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can get some merchandise for Christmas coming up. I know a bunch of merchandise just came in. And if you want to sign up for a membership, you can get additional shows. On Friday nights, I do the shows for the members, and so I hope you can come and join us. Regardless of that, I really appreciate you guys listening to the show. You guys have made Sasquatch Chronicles. As they come up on 500 shows, I reflect back on everything, and I'm kind of surprised I'm still here, to be honest with you. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to the show and support the show. It means more to me than, I mean, I should probably say it more than I do, but it really means the world to me. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to the show, talking to your friends about the show. It means the world to me because a lot of work does go into the show. I know it sounds like it doesn't, but believe me, a lot of work goes into this show. Anyway, I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. I'm going to be back next week, but just in case I don't say it, I want to wish you guys a Merry Christmas. I want to wish you guys a Happy New Year. Whatever dreams you have, whatever wishes you have, I hope it all comes true for you. Thank you guys again for being here. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Jim to the show. Jim, thanks for coming on.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on, Jim. I really appreciate being here again. And I know we're going to talk about a couple encounters tonight. I know the first one actually happened in Oklahoma. If you would you just kind of start from the beginning? Tell us what you were doing and what happened.
Well, oddly enough, it was about 1.5 miles from my house, and you got to understand, the little town that I live in, it's basically like a modern-day Mayberry. The only thing we're missing is Sheriff Andy. Anyway, my wife has a little Chihuahua dog, sort of a little Chiweenie anyway, and she went into heat, and she got out of the house one night and just took off. And my wife is attached to this dog to the point to where if anything happens to this dog, you know, kids or not, I'm a dead man. So, that in mind, I took off after the dog in my pickup. Well, where the football field is from our house is, like I said, about a good mile and a half away, and it's off out in a small little wooded area off the backside of a residential neighborhood. And I got off on the backside of the ball field there on this itty-bitty little one-lane paved road. And, you know, nature calls as it does, so I figured, hey, you know, we'll stop and take a leak. So I pulled over on the side, trying to get as far off the side of this road as I could, just in case somebody passed by. And I opened up my door, got out, handled what I needed to handle. And I kept hearing something off out in the brush while I was there, just on the other side of my truck. And that's when things started to get kind of weird. You know, I never had any kind of indication that there was anything there. I mean, it sounded like a squirrel rustling around. You know, just digging for nuts and berries off out the brush or something. So I never really paid it too much mind. But it started smelling like I had a skunk at the back end of my pickup. So I kind of figured, all right, well, I don't want to get sprayed. It's the middle of the night. That's just something I don't want to deal with. So I got back in the truck, and as soon as I got back in the truck and closed my door, I hadn't even got a chance to get my hand on the shift selector to get my pickup in gear yet. And it felt like the ass end of my truck just got tagged by a vehicle. It felt like I had just got rear-ended. And I look up in my rear view, and I can see the silhouette of something in my tail lights, probably about a good 6.5, 7 foot tall, just standing there. Well, I kind of figured, all right, there's somebody back there. And then I heard the damn thing yell. Well, it was more of a scream anyway. At that point in time, I didn't know what I had a hold of. So I let fear overtake me. Instead of investigating it, like a smart person, I took off.
Yeah, I would too. And did you ever get a look at it? Was it more or less just a silhouette? Is that all you were able to see?
It was basically just a silhouette. It looked like a really tall, honestly, it looked like an NFL linebacker in a fur coat.
Yeah, that's interesting. I almost wonder sometimes if you get out because you were peeing, it was kind of giving you a bump or a nudge or, you know, it stepped out of the woods. That's fascinating. You know, I don't think a person would have done that. I don't think a person would have got out and bumped someone. You just don't do that, especially in, well, not only in the South. You just don't do that anywhere. It's a good way to get shot.
Well, not only that, you know, I mean, it kind of took me by surprise because the closest house to where I was parked at when this happened was about a good 2 or 3 blocks away anyway.
What did you think it was at the time, Jim? What did you think actually hit your truck?
When it first happened, quite truthfully, it felt like I had just been rear-ended at low speed. And my first thought was somebody's out here playing on an ATV. Because, I mean, it didn't hit like it was a full-sized vehicle. I mean, it just felt like somebody nudged me with a four-wheeler or something. But, you know, after seeing the silhouette of what I saw, honestly, it made sense about the size of that nudge versus the size of it, because I could see where something that size could move that truck like it did. Because it felt like he scooted me up a few inches.
Makes you wonder if it was an accident, if it was a way to get you out, or if it was just a way to make you leave. What's your impression?
Honestly, if I had to guess, especially with the way it screamed, I think it was trying to tell me, hey, son, you don't need to be here. Move on down the road.
Yeah, that's a fascinating account. I mean, did you go home and tell your wife, or did you tell anyone about what actually took place? I mean, I was out there, and something screamed at me, then bumped the car?
Well, I'll put it to you like this. My mother is the one who turned me on to your show. And as long as she's been listening to you and quite a few others, she's only about an episode or two shy of being an expert herself. She was the first person I told about just as soon as it happened, and it took an act of Congress to keep her from going out and getting a truck, because she wanted me to take her back out to where that happened at. She's never had an encounter herself, and for her, that was an opportunity that I wasn't going to let her take.
Yeah, she sounds like a tough lady.
I explained it to her and told her what happened. She started giving me listening and reading material like I had, like I had just told the doctor that, I had ED or something, Here's all the facts. So that's where my knowledge of it all kind of started, was with that right there, and that's where I actually got introduced to your show and everything after that particular incident took place. Honestly, the more I've looked into it and the more information I've listened to and the more information I've read, honestly, it really makes sense, and it's kind of scary to think that I was that close as well.
Yeah, it is. It is scary. What's Mom's name?
My mom's name is Karen.
Karen, thanks for listening. Say hi to Mom. Give her a shout out. It's true, Jim. I mean, it amazes me. I have people who've been listening for a long time. I almost feel like they're more intelligent than Bigfoot researchers. I mean, they just have a different mindset because they've heard so many encounters, they've heard so many descriptions, they've heard so much behavior that it's kind of odd. People who call themselves Bigfoot researchers, I don't think have that much information or that much knowledge. I'm sure a lot of them listen to the show, but tell me about your second encounter. Where were you at and what happened? I know you're a truck driver, but was the second encounter involving the truck?
My second encounter was involving my pickup as well, actually.
Okay.
And my second encounter wasn't actually a Sasquatch encounter. This one was not far from where we live, right outside of the town of Pauls Valley, Oklahoma, out at the city lake. We had taken our infant daughter, my wife and I, and my brother-in-law had went out there to meet up with our in-laws. They were out at the campgrounds with their camper, fishing, having a good time. Well, we went out there that evening to go and pick my daughter up, who had spent the day with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law out at the lake. And we got there, I guess, about an hour or so after dark, and it was on, I believe, a Saturday. But anyways, we got out there. We spent, I guess, about an hour or so just goofing off, saying hello, visiting and whatnot, And my wife's grandparents were out there as well, so that's actually the reason why we stayed as long as we did. But any Hoosers, everything started to gear down, so, the wife had me take the baby in my pickup with me, and they followed behind me in my brother-in-law's Jeep when we left, and I went ahead and I left out a little bit before they did. And my wife was driving my brother-in-law, because that poor thing, he was, shoot, I've never seen anybody that drunk still able to stand. I mean, it was pitiful. But anyways, I left out, I guess, about a good 2 minutes ahead of them, and I headed on back toward Pauls Valley, headed home. And there on Pauls Valley Lake Road, I had a silhouette of something up ahead of me, and honestly, it looked kind of like it's kind of like a wolf or a coyote at first. And then the closer I got, it stood up on just its two hind legs. And it wasn't no small creature. I mean, it stood up, I guess, good 6 foot or so. I mean, I'm 6'3", and it looked like if I was standing eye to eye with it, it could have very easily looked me square in the eyes, flat-footed. I'm just cruising along about 35 miles an hour trying to figure out what in the hell exactly am I looking at in my headlights. Of course, the baby's in the back seat, cooling her little head off, just having a good time. And I finally get to the point where I realize that what I'm looking at is not my eyesight or my brain playing tricks with me. This thing's actually standing there. And so I swerved it. When I swerved it to go around, it lurched out and tried to grab a hold of my tailgate as I come past. And I freaked out. I floored it. And, you know, the speed limit on that road, because of how winding and curvy it is in the first place, is 25 miles an hour. By the time I reached the stop sign at the end, I was doing almost 90 with an infant in my back seat on a road I should have never been going that fast on. Well, of course, my wife and them are behind me. They saw my tail lights disappear. They never did see the creature. It had done flew the coop by the time my tail lights topped that next hill. So, of course, they're calling, wanting to know what's going on, why are you flying? I never even answered it, which is unusual because anytime my wife calls, I'll wake up for her ringtone. Well, I made it back into Paul's Valley. They finally flagged me down at a convenience store and wanted to know what was going on because my wife said it looked like I had seen a ghost. She said, I ain't never seen you look this nervous or this scared before. She said, you going to have to tell me what's going on. What happened? Did the baby choke or what? So I finally told her, I said, honey, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. And she said, honey, you've got to tell me something. So I just broke down and went ahead and told her the truth about what I had seen and what had happened. And come to find out, she knew, she called it by name, an Indian name that they have there in Oklahoma for it, and I forget exactly what name she called it by, but apparently it's something that she herself and her brother and other members of her family had all seen before themselves, so I wasn't exactly crazy as far as she was concerned. But I told her exactly what had happened and how it had lurched out at the truck like it done, like it was trying to grab a hold and hitch a ride or something, or whatever it was trying to do. And she told me, she said, yes, she said, we won't be going back out there anymore. And that was here this past summer. I won't even go down the road that the lake road's off of anymore after seeing that.
Yeah, and so when you said it stood up, it looked more like a wolf?
The way that it stood up, you know, like I said, you know, he was down the road a good little ways. I'd say about an eighth of a mile from me. Whenever he first stepped out, he was on all fours. And, I mean, it looked like a coyote or a wolf or something like that. But when it stood up, it looked like a person with the head of a wolf. I mean, you had them, you know, just these pointed, almost German Shepherd-like ears and this long snout that just come to a point. It looked like if you took a drug dog, snipped its head off, and put it on the shoulders of a person.
Yeah, it's bizarre. A lot of people see that. You know, it's, I guess, what they would call in the Bigfoot world the dog man. But a lot of people see it. I've had cops. I had a cop almost hit one. And he said it was exactly how you're describing it. He said it had the head of like a German Shepherd or wolf and it had a man's body. And it ran across in front of his patrol car. And he almost hit it. He had to swerve. He almost crashed trying to avoid it. And as he came to a screeching halt, he looked back, and this thing was looking right at him. And it, you know, and they're known to be aggressive like that. That's strange. It reaching out, trying to grab your back bumper, because you know it's not going to stop your car. You know what I mean? Even going 25 miles an hour, I don't think it's going to stop your car.
Well, I ain't gonna lie to you. Just look on its face, and that was the devil in it. What that was.
When you say that, what do you mean? Like, what kind of a look did it have? I mean,
evil.
Was it
like it had no good intentions whatsoever?
Well, before we go on, I want to ask you, Jim, because you got to look at this thing. What do you think that they are? What do you think that that creature is? I realize it's speculation, but in your own personal opinion, what do you think that that thing is?
A hellhound, if you want my honest opinion. Pure and simple, a hellhound.
So more of a demonic entity? Is that what you mean when you say hellhound? You have to forgive me.
That's the closest thing I can come up with to anything logical for it is just a demonic entity.
And it appeared physical, though, because you tried to even avoid hitting it. I mean, you tried swerving around it. So it wasn't like a ghost for the audience listening.
No, I mean, it was physically, tangibly there. I mean, it just, I watched it walk out of the woods at first. Like I said, I thought it was a coyote. But when it stood up, it's, like I said, at first, whenever I first saw it stand up, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I figured, well, I probably need some sleep because my mind's telling me stuff here that really ain't. Until I got up close enough and had to leave skid marks getting around it. And that's when it finally hit me that, no, that's real.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by those encounters. I really am. I know they're terrifying. And to be honest with you, I don't blame you for not going back down that road. I think if you and I switched spots, I don't think I would drive down that road anymore. Because those things are terrifying. I mean, they're more terrifying than Sasquatch. And they tend to be 1,000 times more aggressive in most reports.
I mean, if I had a weapon with me when that happened, oh yeah, I definitely would have tried to have shot it because there ain't nothing friendly about that creature whatsoever. I mean, the way that it lurched out and the way it had tried to basically attach itself to my truck, I mean, it was on the attack. I mean, it felt like I was being targeted for ill intention. And it didn't care that it was a vehicle or not.
Let me ask you, before we go on to your third encounter, what did your wife say about it? I mean, she said she had encountered it and her brothers had encountered it. Was it something on a property or?
It's something they have come across out in the woods around that lake before. It's something they've had out on their properties before. And quite honestly, she told me, she said, anytime you see it, she said, the best thing you can do, get away from it, put as much distance between it and you as you possibly can. Oh, she told me straight up, she said they'll attack anything they can.
Yeah, it's just bizarre that thing's out there. And I've talked to so many witnesses that have seen it, but cops. I mean, like I said, whose word are you going to take? I got a state patrol guy that almost hit one with his rig. And I asked him, I said, what do you think it was? And he goes, it was a half man, half dog, or half man, half wolf. And he kept saying it was a werewolf. And what do you make of that when you see something like that? That's terrifying. That's really terrible, especially with your baby in the back, man. I don't blame you for doing 90 down that road. I would have done the same thing.
The bad part about it is I come out of law enforcement myself before I got into driving big rigs for a living. And I've seen things in law enforcement that, I'm pretty sure, other law enforcement officers listening could attest to. I've seen things that would blow your mind, but that was a first and hopefully a last for me. I've been tangled up in shootouts, fatal car accidents with bodies turned inside out, and I would rather endure any of that again than come face to face with that creature.
Yeah, and that says a lot. That says a lot. I know a lot of cops see a lot of things. They probably wish it. Same with firefighters. You guys see a lot of things that you probably can never forget. And it says a lot when you run into that and you're like, the worst I've ever seen as a cop. I'd rather go back and see that than this thing again. And it is terrifying. I had a lady on one time, her nephew was a cop. I don't know if you heard that show or not, Jim, but he had encountered it. He'd pulled these guys over, and in Spanish they started saying wolf, lobo, and he was pulling them over for speeding. Well, they grabbed their driver's license and they took off. He looks back, this thing's coming out of the woods, it's standing up on two legs, and he describes it as a wolf man, and he shot it 3 times, and it didn't kill it. And according to his aunt said, her nephew said that he knows for a fact he hit it 3 times. And every time he was out in his car patrolling that area, he started becoming, well, I don't even know if paranoid's the right word, but almost paranoid. He kept telling his aunt, it's following him, it's following him, it's following him. And it's a tragic story. He ended up drinking himself to death. But I guess after that encounter, he became a completely different person. He started drinking heavily, wasn't showing up to work, didn't want to go back out. He wasn't patrolling the area he's supposed to be patrolling. He'd just sit in his patrol car. He refused to start going down that road anymore. And it's tragic, when someone doesn't believe you, you start drinking and my heart breaks for him, for the whole situation he had to endure. But they're out there, and you can run into them. I've talked to many, many witnesses that have seen what you saw. Many.
Hell, Wes, I ain't gonna lie. When I finally got home, I did two things before I sat down and started drinking. I hung up my keys, and I put my daughter in her crib after she fell asleep. And I started drinking. I went and grabbed my bottle of whiskey, and I was like, I'm going to drink this memory bye-bye if I can. Now, granted, I fell asleep before that happened and realized when I woke up the next morning I can't be drinking like that. But that was my first thought was, if I can drown this thought process away, that's exactly what I'm going to do because I don't want to remember this.
Yeah. And, I mean, I can't fault you for that. That'd probably be my first move, trying to just drink it away, make it go away. But it never really, you never forget it. It never goes away. It doesn't matter how much you drink. It never goes away. I'm curious about your third encounter. Was it this is in Oklahoma, too, as well?
No, this one was actually right off of Interstate 65 in Indiana.
Okay. Well, if you would, tell us what you were doing and what happened.
So I'm cruising along northbound on Interstate 65, headed up to Chicago, going up there to deliver a load. And my Qualcomm tablet in this truck started going off. Dispatch was telling me that according to all their computers and all their computer wisdom, that my temperature setting on my refrigerated trailer was out of range for the product I was hauling. Well, I can't actually read those messages while I'm driving, so I didn't find any. I didn't find out what those were till after I got stopped. But dispatch actually called me. And they told me what was going on, told me what the messages were all about, and asked me if I could pull off on the side of the road, go check to make sure everything was kosher. So I was like, yeah, I can do that. And it's something I've done, I know 1,000 times before. I just found an exit ramp there on the side of the highway, and I pulled off, shut the truck down, got out, went back there to go check. And where I was, I can't tell you any kind of town name or anything like that of exactly where I was. I don't even remember the exit number I pulled off on, but it's surrounded by nothing but farmland. I mean, nothing for miles, literally. So I get off the side of the highway there on that exit ramp on the shoulder. I killed the motor on the truck. I got out. I guess it was about, I want to say about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. So I get out, get back to my trailer, and I start doing diagnostic on my refrigeration unit. I mean, it was showing me that it was within temperature range, but still, you want to make sure that you're not missing anything either. So I start running diagnostics on that unit, and I started noticing this musky smell. I mean, it smelled awful close to stale urine with kind of a skunky hint, And I started noticing I could hear something breathing. And so I reached into the sidebox on the back of my cab, flipped that lid open, and I reached in and switched that toggle switch in there on to turn the LED work lights on the back of my cab on. And I saw this head coming toward me, leaning in, and realized this ain't no ordinary animal. I was less than 3 feet away from a Bigfoot, standing, I know, about 7 foot tall. I'm 6'3", and I was looking up at this thing. And he's just kind of got this curious look about him. I wouldn't say menacing or anything like that, just more inquisitive. Well, I froze in place because, I've had that one run in before, but I've never been this close. This thing was close enough to me in proximity. If it wanted to reach across the deck of my truck and grab me up, I'm just Raggedy Ann at that point, play with me as you will. But he just kind of stood there and stared at me, just like he was trying to figure out something. Like he was piecing all the puzzle pieces together, so to speak. About that point, my refrigeration unit kicked on that trailer. And, of course, it's run by a diesel engine. Well, it scared the hell out of me to the point, and when it kicked on, it scared me bad enough, I tried to run and lost a shoe. Tripped me up, and I turned over about the time that it took the back of its hand and slapped that unit. And I don't mean no little love tap either. I mean, it busted fiberglass on it and then took off running. I mean, and the power behind this thing when it took off running, you could feel the ground tremor underneath you every time that the feet of this thing hit the ground, and just took off out through this field. Disappeared just as fast as it showed up. Well, I got back in the truck at that point, fired it up, didn't even close my sidebox. I left it open and my work lights on. I didn't stop till I was on the opposite side of Chicago at that point.
When it stepped out, Jim, was it, so it must have been just a few feet from you, because it slapped the box.
The distance between where I was standing and where it was standing was less than 4 feet. The only thing that separated me and it were the frame rails on the back of this truck. He was standing right over my drive tires. Had its head poked in between the back of my sleeper cab and the front of my trailer. I mean, he was right there.
Can you describe for the audience what you saw?
Well, I didn't get a good look at the body. Of course, he was outside of the view of the LED lights on the back of my cab. All I got was from the shoulders, or the top of the shoulders up. And as wide and broad as those shoulders were, I only got the right-hand shoulder at the top of it where he leaned in past the fairing on the back of my cab. But that head, it was oblong, and his eyes were just piercing, just his big, piercing brown eyes. And even in those LEDs, I was expecting to at least see it glow, but no, you got the full view of the eyes, just big brown eyes. Kind of narrow, close together, And to describe the skin on the face where the hair around the sides wasn't, it honestly looked like somebody had taken a black Italian leather glove and just formed the face out of it. And the nose was definitely pronounced, but it was kind of flat, smushed, like a little kid pressing their nose up against a piece of glass, almost like that of a gorilla. And as far as ears go, there was so much fur on that head, I couldn't tell if he had any or not. But I thought it was kind of strange because the look he was giving me, like I said, it was more inquisitive than anything, like he was curious, but he was grinning. Not necessarily showing teeth, but grinning. I mean, it looked like a person with Down syndrome that was happy to see you, not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? Almost makes you, it sounds like he was just curious on what you were doing. And I don't blame you for, thank God that engine kicked on, scared him off, you know what I mean? I can imagine that engine kicking on and scaring both of you guys, or you and whatever they are.
I can't lie to you. Honestly, my mother and I, after talking about it, she was the first person I spoke to about it, And I kind of think my mother and my theory we've come up with would definitely be the rest of the explanation behind exactly why it approached me the way it did. And with the load I was hauling at the time, I'd picked up a load from Kellogg's, and it was a load of Rice Krispie treats going to a grocery store chain. And the refrigerated trailers that we haul are vented, because there are certain produces and stuff like that you have to vent, or the gases coming off of them are actually toxic, especially with citrus. And it will overwhelm you, which is why you can't haul certain other produces alongside citrus. Bad things happen. But, around that trailer, I mean, for quite a ways, especially if the wind's blowing just right, all you can smell is marshmallow. And I think a large portion of that encounter had a lot to do with the fact that, you know, any creature and every creature on this planet likes sweets. And who doesn't, you know, get curious about marshmallows? And I think, well, my mother and I both have formed this consensus, is I think that had a lot to do with why it approached, is more so thinking with its stomach than thinking with its logic.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's strange. I've had a lot of truck drivers that have come across these things. I've had guys that will be at rest stops, and these things will come up and just kind of try and figure out what's going on here. Why are you stopped? Why are you... but in this situation, that actually makes more sense. You know, that it probably smelled the Rice Krispie treats, and everything within probably a mile could smell it.
Oh, easily, if not further.
What do you think that they are, Jim? Well, I mean, you got a good look at this creature. You got a good look at its face. What do you honestly think that these things are?
Honestly, with a lot of the encounters that I've listened to, the good and the bad, as well as my own encounters, I think, quite honestly, they're some kind of animal. Because, I mean, you know, they show, you know, that they can be compassionate, especially toward each other, just like any other animal would be. But they're also territorial, just like any other animal would be. Honestly, you know, I've mulled it over a few times in my head, and I'm wondering, quite truthfully, if there's not a possibility that they could be the missing link we keep looking for.
Kind of like the Neanderthal. I guess maybe Neanderthal's a bad example, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only explanation I have. You know, I mean, as far as what they actually are in all fact, I mean, there's absolutely no telling. I mean, are they members of the great ape family? Are they descendants of us that just haven't evolved? I mean, honestly, that's just an answer from a scientific standpoint that I'm nowhere near qualified to give. But honestly, my opinion is I believe there's some kind of animal.
Yeah, I just find it fascinating in your encounter where you got a good look at its face. I've talked to people like what you're describing. They'll describe it as kind of goofy, kind of, maybe Down syndrome, that Down syndrome look. And forgive any parents out there that have kids with Down syndrome. I don't mean to be derogatory towards that, but sometimes it's the only way to describe something. But they'll describe it, and then a lot of times, like in your own situation, would you say it was more of a human expression it was giving you? I'm not saying they're human, but I mean, was the expression remind you of human?
In a way, yes, but in a way, no. I mean, it seemed like it had like a genuine, human curiosity. But it also came across as the innocence of a puppy. Just the innocent curiosity of an animal, So, in a way, yeah, in a way, no.
Well, thank God it wasn't aggressive with you, especially being that close, showing its teeth, growling at you, having the look like it wants to kill you. I would imagine all of your encounters, still stay with you, but I would imagine you still think about that from time to time, especially when you go to stop your truck somewhere.
Yeah, I've become extremely selective of where I park now. Like, I won't park at a rest area anymore. I won't park on the side of the road for anything unless it's an absolute necessity, like a breakdown or a blown tire. Anytime I park up with the intention of staying, like what I'm doing now, doing my break, I'm at a truck stop that is definitely well lit in the nighttime hours, and I'm parked in the middle of the parking lot rather than being parked around the edges closest to the wood line. I'd like to be able to see something coming out before I need to know it's there.
Yeah, I can't blame you for that. Well, Jim, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing the encounters, and we'll give a shout out to Mom again for for listening. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing the encounters. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, hey, while we're shouting out to my mom, well, hey, Mom, thanks for turning me on to this.
Absolutely.
My mom talks about you and your brother like you are members of the family. Trust me, she knows more about y'all's shows than any one person I know, so she's definitely my go-to whenever I need advice about stuff like this.
Yeah, that's
But
nice.
I've definitely enjoyed sharing these encounters with you today, for sure.
Thanks again, Jim. Well, I want to welcome Mike to the show. Mike, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here. And I know your encounter took place in Mississippi. If you would you tell us what you were doing and just kind of walk us into what happened?
I'm in law enforcement, and I was a narcotics agent, and it was on a state highway, but it's not like a well-traveled highway, but it is a state highway. And it's on the highway goes to the management area. And I was backed in about 50 yards on a gravel road at the entrance to the management area where you have to not really check in, but you have to get a card and fill it out and stick it in your windshield when you go in there. So I'm waiting, and I get out of my vehicle and go to the back of it, and I'm actually going to walk around to the other side. About 50 to 60 feet from me. I'm about 6'3", 6'4", and back then I was about 220, 230. And this thing was about my height. I mean, I'm looking at it, but I'm not having to look up. I'm not looking down, just looking right at it. And it was kind of profiled from me. It had its head turned a little bit looking at me, but when it stopped, it then turned and almost squared off with me looking at me, but it still was kind of at an angle toward the brush. And we just looked at each other.
And you kind of broke up there, Mike. So you stepped out of your car, and this thing had stepped out right in front of where you were at?
Yeah, I was in a Tahoe, and I walked to the back. I walked around to the back into my truck from a Tahoe, and it stepped out. I was at the back, and it stepped out. I didn't hear anything until I just seen something step out. It was a sunny day, but at that hour where I was at, the sun was low. I still had light. I could see clearly, but it was still low light. We just looked at each other. It was a short encounter, but while it was standing off to my right in the brush, which I couldn't see in the brush, I heard a rumbling growl. It was loud. It was close. But what I was looking at never broke out. It never looked behind it. It just kept its eye on me. And I kind of cut my eyes over to the brush, and then what was in front of me walked off. And then I went and got in my vehicle and left.
Can you describe for the audience what you saw? What stepped out in front of you?
It was walking upright. The leg. Humans, we stand up and our legs are straight. This was slumped, legs bent, arms almost down to the knees, hairy, but not like completely. There was patches, especially across the chest and the abdomen area, that just did not have any fur on. I mean, just sparse. Very little around the face. A brow, protruding brow, dark eyes. I could see the eyes moving, but they were dark. The nose was kind of broad, but not like a gorilla where it's open like that, but it was just broad. The face is wide. It's not proportionally to me. The head is bigger than me. I mean, it was wider. It wasn't actually bulky, but it was wider across the shoulders, the knee, about 1.5, maybe 2 times. Muscular. When it moves, you could see muscles. Forearms were extremely muscular. Hands, fingers were kind of long. The thumb, like if I held my hand up, it was not like me holding my hand up. Its thumb would be further down, like for grabbing something. I mean, it could just reach and grab. It's just odd shaped. Proportionally, I mean, it would fit its size, I guess.
Did its facial expressions ever change?
It never changed. The only thing moved was his eyes. It just.
Did it just look kind of stone faced, or did it have an expression on its face?
Just a blank stare.
And why do you think it stepped out? Why do you think it came out in the open? Do you think it was already headed in that way and you guys just crossed paths?
Yeah, I mean, my vehicle was off. I had a radio, which I have an earpiece in my ear, so I can hear, but the radio's not loud from my radio. So it was quiet, and I was on a gravel road, so I'm not really making all that much noise. Just come out.
Yeah, and it's terrifying to hear the other one in the brush growling at you. With what did you think it was? I mean, what did you think was going on at the time?
I was dumbfounded. Don't know what to think. That just doesn't exist.
And so what did you do next? Did you get in your rig and leave?
I got my vehicle and left. And I didn't go back to that area. I went back to that area spring of this year. Just rode by and I wouldn't pull back down in there again.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Especially, it's eye-opening. And I always enjoy when law enforcement runs into these things, not for your guys' sake, but for people that, you go out to homes and they're having prowler, quote-unquote prowler, and you guys can kind of sense that it may not be a prowler. But I think if you've never had an encounter, a lot of times law enforcement goes out and they're just irritated. They're like, no one's here, you're crazy, and I'm out of here. You know what I mean? And I think when law enforcement actually encounters these things, when they go out to rural areas, they're more apt to stop and kind of listen to someone. Wouldn't you agree?
You just have to take everything in. I mean, there's probably 1,000 yards from where I was at. There's a couple of houses on the same side of the road that I'm at, and there's one on the opposite side of the road, and then there's the county line. And you're talking thousands of acres. And these people have so much acres, before they're into the national forest area. So, and the houses are off the road. The backyard is in a wood line. There is a wood line. So, and I worked there 5 years, and I never had to, go out there for anything, just nothing. There's livestock then, but they don't report anything. There's just nothing ever happens. I'm there for a totally different reason, but you never hear anything from those people. They don't call in about things. They're self-sufficient. They don't report anything. If something's happening, they don't report it.
Was there any other times that you encountered this creature?
Noises, which I didn't know what they were. I'm actually from a city. Grew up. I did hunt, but doing what I do, I was from meth labs and the marijuana grows. I was, out in the woods and have to sit up on stuff, but just noises at night that just didn't make sense. Just what kind of animal makes a noise? Dogs and cats don't. They make noise, but at the end of some of them's like a ah sound, and it's just they don't make sounds like that.
Yeah, was it like screams? Is that what you were hearing?
I didn't ever hear scream. It wasn't a scream. It was loud enough for me to hear it, but there's deep hollows, so it's traveling through a hollow. You hear it like behind me, and it'll be across from me, and then it just goes silent, and then you hear it again. It'll be in a different area.
I always feel for guys like you that have to go out there and you're investigating marijuana or meth labs, and you and I both know that people that do that are usually out in the middle of freaking nowhere when they're doing that. And so you can come across these things, I've had guys who they do moonshining, like in Kentucky and places like that. And I've heard all kinds of stories. Guys out there with their distiller and doing what they're doing out in the middle of the woods, and they come across these things. There was one guy who it got into, I don't know if it was a barley or what it was, eating and drinking the the alcohol he had out there, and he was terrified. He said it was a big gorilla drinking his moonshine and eating the corn and the barley and everything else they put in it. He was eating all the stuff that was in there, and he was shocked. He didn't know what it was. He didn't want to come on the show because he's got an illegal operation going on. And I got no problems with moonshiners. You and I are on the other side of the fence. I could care less if they're out there doing that. Meth lab's a different story. But It's fascinating when you hear about it. I've heard many guys out, with growing marijuana. It's legal here on the West Coast now, but prior to that, I used to get a lot of stories. California, a lot of guys out there growing marijuana and coming across these things.
Just now, when I'm in there, I mean, I'm armed to the tooth. Pistol, shotgun, AR-15, and sometimes a sniper rifle. It just depends on what I'm doing. I'm not scared of a human. I know there's bears around there. I have yet to see a bear around here at all. Only bear I've seen in the state of Mississippi is actually where Teddy Roosevelt, the term teddy bear, come from. Right down the road from where that took place. It's the only time I've ever seen a bear in my life in the wild. Wildlife Fish here says there's no panthers, but they've come across me, walked out across me. I know they exist around here. They just deny that those animals exist. But they're out. They're here. And they're not black. I mean, they look like a mountain lion. That's what they are.
Yeah, it's you have to be safe while you're out there, especially Sasquatch aside. Some of those meth heads, man, you got to be careful with some of those guys. They're sketchy, and they're not in their right mind half the time.
I'm far enough away from them. I'm in a ghillie suit. I mean, they can't see me. I can see them, type of deal. But I smell like a human. But you're not going to smell me. I mean, I'm not worried about a human smelling. I'm more worried about dogs and others, that they're around there. But when I did all that, I didn't have that incident, so I didn't know. If I'd have met that thing ahead of time, there's no way I'd be out there in the woods by myself. There's no way.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I wanted to ask you, going back to your encounter and the one that stepped out, how far away from you was it? And would you say it had human characteristics, or would you say, no, it was nothing more than just an animal?
It's about 50, 60 feet. No, it's an animal. I don't know much about them. I ran across your thing on YouTube not long ago, so I don't know much about them. But a couple of things that I've heard that get on all fours. This thing could easily go to all fours. Just the way it's built, it could just drop, forward and be on all fours and be gone. The legs, the power in those legs. It's when you're looking at the legs, that's just too much leg. You look at it, it's powerful. I mean, this thing. I've only seen that Patty film a couple of times. This thing, it didn't look like that, but it wasn't built like that. But you wouldn't want to get in the ring with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people say that. I think most people are expecting to see Patty when they come across these things, and most of the time that's not the case.
It looked like a strange ape.
As a cop, don't you find it a little odd that no one has caught up with this thing? I mean, you're a professional investigator. Don't you find that a little strange?
Well, I've seen a little part of this show called Finding Bigfoot. I've watched. See one? If you're in a location where, like probably up there where you're at, you stay out in the woods long enough, you're probably going to run into one. Mine was just a haphazard encounter. No. I wasn't looking for it, and it wasn't looking for me.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But don't you find it odd that no body's been found? Don't you find it odd that, you saw the size of this thing, and to be frank with you, the one you saw really wasn't as big as probably your average person who comes across these things. Most people that see them, we're talking 8 to 10 feet tall. And, don't get me wrong, I'm sure it was big. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say, for such a large animal that a lot of people are seeing, including law enforcement, including guys in the military, including judges, including doctors, including house moms, all around the world, yet it hasn't been proven. I find that odd.
Somebody just doesn't want it proven. They don't want it in the books. It's not the average Joe that's not wanting it there. It's somebody or some entity with a vested interest that does not be brought out for whatever reason. I kind of understand why they don't want to say panthers around here, because then if it's found on somebody's, like around here, we have pine trees, tree farmers. But you wouldn't be able to cut your trees because it'd be an endangered species living on your property. You couldn't alter it. Now there's a giant ape out there. You really couldn't alter anything by law, if you know about endangered species. But you know that if it's not recognized, it's not endangered.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, it's fascinating and it's frustrating because they are out there and people can run into them. I'm not so sure that they're endangered, but I agree with you. I think if it came out, let's say it was nothing more than an ape, that Endangered Species Act would take effect, and it would hurt some things, but I just have a hard time believing that's the ultimate cause why it hasn't come out. I just have a hard time believing that. But, at the end of the day, I could be wrong.
I work for the state, and I had access to state buildings in downtown Jackson. And we have archaeology, anthropology, all that, and paleontology. And there's a vault in there. Only certain people can get in that vault. And there's stuff in there that it's like top secret, and it's a state agency. And they don't want people to know about.
Interesting. Makes you wonder what's in that vault.
Whatever it is, it's worth. I've seen the vault. I've never been in the vault. I can't go in the vault, but I've seen the vault, and you're not getting in there. Whatever they're keeping in there they're tight-lipped about it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really I've never heard of such a thing. What doesn't shock me one bit, but that's fascinating that the state would have that.
There's probably been a state they got something in a vault somewhere that no one knows about.
Yeah, I believe that. Well, Mike, it was a fascinating encounter. I really appreciate you coming on. I know you're not feeling well, but I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your encounter.
Appreciate it.
Well, next up, I want to welcome Shirley to the show. Shirley, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your encounter. And if you would give us a little bit of background and then maybe walk us into your encounter. I know it happened many, many years ago. Walk us into what happened.
Okay. Well, basically, I was born and raised in the Central Valley of California, not far from Castle Air Force Base. But what really shaped me is I hung out with 4 boy cousins, one 3 years older than me, one 2 years older than me, one my age, and one younger than me. And they taught me all about, hunting for pheasant and duck and dove hunting, and I didn't like shooting them. But I did have a slingshot, and I was pretty good with that. And they taught me about, all the little critters and things that you could eat in the wild. And we would sit around, and they'd tell me stories about things that you should stay away from, how to recognize particular snakes. And so I learned from them to not have any fear. You only fear those things that are dangerous. And, us kids, going back to when you're a baby, babies don't fear anything. You're taught fear. So, with those guys, I had an interest in wildlife, but, that wasn't where my heart was. My heart was in writing, and I wanted to be a world-renowned journalist. But my boy cousins were tough on me. They did not give me any slack. An example of one is they were on the roof of the house cleaning frogs that we had just gigged, as you say, and I was climbing up the ladder, and when I got to the top, they threw the guts of a frog in my face, and I fell back with the ladder falling and hit the dirt, and with the wind knocked out of me, and they just laughed. They weren't going to come to my rescue. I just had to get up and just keep at it. but I love those boys, and I still love them dearly. So that's kind of my background. So getting into my story, it did happen a long, long time ago. I was in the 6th grade, and 6th graders go to science camp. And here in the Central Valley, science camp was at a place called Camp Green Meadows, which is in Mariposa County, I believe, right on the border of Sierra County or Sierra National Forest. And we were all thrilled. You know, all of us kids really wanted to go. Back then, it was what everybody considered was a lot of money, $50. So I was begging and pleading, and I really wanted to go. I didn't want to be one of those kids that was going to be left behind in the classroom, and everybody else was going to be at camp, and everybody else was going to be coming back and telling their stories. I just didn't want to be one of those. So I just tried to raise as much money as I could, and then I got a surprise, and my stepfather called, and he told me that, guess what I'm giving you for your birthday? And when he told me he was sending me to camp, I just, went crazy. I was thrilled to death. So all of us kids go to camp, and there's always an overnight camp out. So as, we go through the evening, we roast marshmallows, we make s'mores, we learn how to cook over an open campfire and, the safe things to do to make a campfire. And all of the kids, when it was time for bed, spread their sleeping bags out along this, I call it a river. It was too small for a creek, along this river that had a sandy bank. And they're like, well, we're going to sleep comfortable because it's nice and soft out here. And I'm like, no, you guys are going to wake up in the morning and you're going to be freezing cold. That sand's going to be cold. And they're like, nah, Shirley didn't know what she was talking about. So everybody slept on the bank. I decided to sleep up by the picnic table, and I grabbed some stems that had, that I could reach and, made myself the ground a little softer and got my sleeping bag together, and I went to sleep. I do recall that not far on the picnic table, the counselors left a lantern burning really, really low. And I didn't think anything of it, but I guess nowadays people would say you shouldn't do that. But they left it burning really, really low for us kids. And they didn't sleep there with us. I don't know where they slept that night, but they weren't there in our immediate vicinity of sleeping. So I'm the only one not on the sandy bank. And I'm facing a big, huge tree. It's about maybe 5 feet from my face. Go to sleep. And I wake up, and I know it's late because I'm really groggy, but I have to go to the bathroom. So I'm laying on my left, facing the tree, and I unzip part of my sleeping bag, and I grab my flashlight, and I'm turning to unzip more of my sleeping bag, and as the sleeping bag, I'm unzipping it, I have the flashlight in my hand, and as I kind of moved around towards my right to get out of the sleeping bag, I look and I see this big, gigantic, monkey, hairy thing, man thing, standing there, and it was white, silvery white is the best I can describe it. And I knew it was that color because even though I had that smaller bit of light from the table, I had my flashlight and I could see its legs and its arms, but I learned from my cousins that you don't flash lights in animals' faces. They were hunters, and that was like one of those rules that you didn't do because you're not supposed to be hunting at night. And I just remembered, don't flash the light in their face. So I had the flashlight, and I looked, and I was puzzled. I didn't know what I was looking at. It was huge. I knew it wasn't a counselor. It was way too big. Now, this was the night before my birthday. So it was October 21st, 1966. And, you know, I'm already at my full-grown height of 5'7". And my older cousin, he was at the one that was 3 years older. He was already 6'4". But, you know, he was out of high school and that sort of thing, and he had gone off to Vietnam. But I knew what height was. I knew what height was from the schools treating us kids to go see the Harlem Globetrotters. So I knew what height was, but I could not tell you how tall this was, except it was taller than, I mean, any person I had ever seen in my entire life. I mean, it was just way up there. I mean, it was ceiling height tall, and my house has 9-foot ceilings, and I look up at those ceilings and I'm like, you know, maybe it could have been that tall, but I just didn't know. And it was standing there, and it had its right side with this arm down towards me, and I guess when it got a glimpse of my flashlight or something, it turned slightly and it looked at me, and I'm staring in its eyes. I'm just staring and staring. And like I said, I was puzzled. I was not freaked out. I was a little scared because I didn't know what it was. But I can tell you this. I know what a bear is. I know what a wolf is. I know what those kind of critters are. And if it had been a bear or a coyote or something else coming through our camp and I woke up in the middle of the night, I would have screamed bloody murder. But I didn't. I just stood there with my mouth open because I was super, super puzzled. So I just looked at it, and it was just so odd. It looked at me like, you're not enough to be bothered with. I'm just, you know, it's no different than, you know, you're looking at anything else in a casual manner and thinking, oh, you know, that's not worth my interest. And I remembered as it turned, I could see hair on its chest. And you have to remember, well, I can't say remember because I haven't told you. All of this information came to my head in a reoccurring dream that I had had for years and years and years. And it drove me crazy until, as an adult, I finally learned that in most cases, reoccurring dreams are memories. So the only thing I wanted to do as an adult was get rid of the dream. So in my dream, when it turned to me, now that my reoccurring dream is now over with, I have more memory that has come forward after talking to a few good friends about this. And I remember the face, the hairline came down to in the middle of its forehead, and the face was clear of hair. And I don't remember seeing any ears. And when I say hair, I mean, it wasn't fuzzy like a dog or, you know, a cat or any other creature, mountain lion or whatever else out there you see in the world. It was hair. It wasn't flowing or anything, but I could tell, I could see straightness, you know, straight waviness to it. And and I also remembered that its butt had hair on it. You know, I can't recall if it was matted, but I remembered as a kid being, you know, looking at it, and its butt had hair. And its face was light. I don't know what color. As I stared in its eyes, they were light. I don't know what color. They were just light. They weren't dark and beady like some other folks have have described them. And, you know, through this reoccurring dream, I kept saying, that can't be mine. You know, I mean, that can't be true. That can't be true. As I was growing up, this is something that's not real, but I'm still dreaming it. And of course, as I got older, I was thinking, well, I wonder, everybody else says theirs is dark brown or chocolate or black, and they had dark beady eyes, and, you know, they had hair all over here and there, and that's not mine. So after I'm looking at it and I decide, okay, I don't need to go to the bathroom, I very slowly zipped back up my sleeping bag, and I remembered swinging my flashlight over to look at the kids on the beach to see if anybody else was awake and looking, and they were all asleep. And then I swung my flashlight back, and it was gone. And I felt it. I thought I was, you know, and my memory was kind of a little fogged, but I thought I heard it walking away, but I didn't really hear it. I felt the vibrations on my butt as I'm in the sleeping bag of it walking away. And I couldn't see it, but I wasn't about to flash my flashlight to look for it. I just felt it walking away, and I'm like, okay, it's going away, and it didn't do anything. And I just slowly zipped up my sleeping bag because I didn't know where it was. And I remember still having my flashlight in my hand, and I zipped up my sleeping bag to cover my head, kind of like little kids who, if they cover their face, people can't find them, you know. So if you can't see me, you can't find me, you know. I don't know. It was the day before I turned 13. So the next day, it was still in my mind, or I was traumatized. And as I look back as an adult, I was probably what do you call, in shock, functioning shock. And I wasn't myself that day, and I got surprised at the camp dinner with a birthday cake. And I remember grabbing the cake and going back to my cabin and just sitting there and looking at the cake. And some of my friends came, and they're like, aren't you going to share? And I'm like, no, I'm taking it home to my mother. And they're, you know, some called me selfish, but the ones that knew me since before elementary school, they said, well, you know, whatever's going on in your head, we understand, because they knew me as a chatty. I had a good disposition. I never had any problems with anybody, but, you know, my guy friends, not the girls. I connected more with guys. They knew something was in my head, but they didn't know what, and I wasn't about to open my mouth. So took the cake home. My mother says, Shirley, why did you bring this cake home? Why didn't you share with the other kids? And I'm like, well, because I had to bring it home to you. And she's like, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would you bring this thing all the way back from camp and not share it with the kids? And I didn't have an answer, except, you know, in my adult mind now, I'm thinking maybe that was my evidence, you know, of what happened to me. So from there, I needed to know what it was. You know, I had to know. So I went to a couple of libraries, and I'm checking out books weekly, you know, animal type books, science books, everything I could find. And I couldn't find what I was looking for. And I remember there was one librarian in the summer reading program. She couldn't believe I was, you know, checking out, you know, 3 books at a time, reading them in a week, because in that program you would get a ticket for an ice cream cone to go to Rexall Drugs and get your ice cream. And she didn't believe me. So the next time I checked out a set of books, it was totally unrelated to what I was looking for, and I gave her an oral report. Well, after that, she didn't question me anymore. She knew I was reading them. So throughout the years, I just kept trying to figure out what it was. And that following summer, the fair came. And this attraction at the fair, it had, see real live Bigfoot, and it had a picture of something similar to what I had seen, but I'm like, that's not what I saw, but it's similar. So I pay my 50 cents, and I go in, and there's this crappy monkey gorilla suit stuffed thing, stretched out about maybe 8 feet long in a box. And I was sorely disappointed. I was even more pissed off because I lost my 50 cents. And I came out and I said to the guy in that snippish 13-year-old teenage mouth, I said, that's not a Bigfoot. That's not a Bigfoot. And he says, well, what do you know about that, little girl? What do you know about a Bigfoot? And his attitude was condescending. And I said, because I've seen one. And then he got interested. He started asking me, where did I see one? When did I see one? And I just, kind of just threw my head back and walked on to the rest of the fair. And I didn't have a satisfaction of not telling him. I was just really disappointed that, it was fake and that I had lost my money. So as the years go by, I watch monster programs on TV, and we get more and more information. And then the Patterson film came out. Now, this is really odd because I never remembered when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out. I knew it was 1967, but I didn't know when. And I looked it up last night, and it was October 20th, 1967. And it happened to me October 21st, 1966. And I'm like, how creepy is that? That's so close to, like a year later. And I'm thinking at the time that there were, back when it came out, that there were only one kind of Bigfoot. So I'm watching, stuff, and believe it or not, even though I'm a baby boomer and I'm 65, us baby boomers are the ones that really got technology going. So I keep up. I may not know about a lot of things, but if somebody gives me a suggestion about something, I check it out. So I used to use YouTube just for, makeup, gardening, that sort of thing. It never occurred to me the outlet and the many channels on Sasquatch that there were. And I also had, I have Amazon Prime. And I saw this one guy, Todd Standing, and he talked for a few minutes about his latest documentary video. So I went to Amazon Prime, and or was it Netflix? I can't remember. And I pulled it up and I watched the whole thing. As I watched it, and he put pictures up of these creatures that he saw, and there was one creature, and I think he calls it Jake. It's dark brown, dark face, dark eyes. It's got hair on its face, and this was March of this year, and all of a sudden, an explosion of more memories was coming out of my head. I remember I was even lightheaded. I remember that so clearly that day that I was watching it. And then I had to go find more information because I said, that's what I saw. That's what I saw, except it didn't have all that hair, but that face. If you take all that hair off of that face, then you see a human face underneath that, and that's what I saw. And it just, I was high, so to speak, because it was like, yay, I found it. And then after that, I was like into every YouTube channel to listen to everybody's stories. I wanted to know if anybody else had seen anything in my area, if anybody else had seen one that was white or silver or gray or whatever. I'm listening voraciously to everything I can find, and I found your channel, and I liked listening to your channel because I liked people telling their stories without all this other crap going on, or multiple. I have to say multiple hosts, because I've listened to other podcasts, and it was too confusing because you didn't have a one-on-one conversation with a person. So I liked yours, and then I decided to write my story up, and I sent it to Bigfoot Case Files because I listened to hers, and all she did was read what people sent in or showed a video clip and the person narrating of what they sent in. There was no judgment. There was no nothing. Just send it in. So I did that, and I sent, after she told me it was ready, I sent the link to family members and very close friends that I can trust because I knew that they would give me an honest opinion, and they would just tell me whatever. And honestly, I did not even tell anybody. I told my husband of 36 years in 2000, and he said, I believe you. I'm from upstate New York, and we get a lot of weird stuff up there, particularly UFOs. And I said, oh, thank goodness. Okay, so he knows, he has his thing and I have my thing. And then this past summer, I told it to my two grandchildren, 9 and 7. And of course, they believed me, but my 9-year-old grandson, he asked for details. He asked for lots of details, and I'm giving him, he's interrogating me about it, and I'm giving him as much as possible. And he says, I believe you, Grandma Gigi. He says, I really do. I believe you. And, of course, my granddaughter said, well, I believe you too, but she goes skipping off. But he stays, and he asked me more questions. And I felt really good. And then at some point from March to now, I sent an email to Dr. Jeff Meldrum because he was in Todd Standing's documentary. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to bother Todd, but Dr. Meldrum believes that there is some sort of creature out there, and I'm going to email him and give him a short synopsis of my encounter. And when I emailed him, he emailed me back in 20 minutes. I was shocked. And he asked me some questions about how they stood, what their hands looked like. And it was at that time I remembered, oh, my goodness, I did see a hand. I saw the palm, and the palm was empty. It was, your hand as it hangs down, your fingers are kind of curved a little bit. And he asked me, did I see it walk away? And I said, no, I didn't see it walk away. He had asked me about the rest of its body, how its head looked. And the only thing I remembered about the head was as that I couldn't see, we have our head, and then we have that little curve in the back where our neck is. And I didn't see a curve. It was just head straight down to the butt, and then, to the legs. But the back was the definition where the big part was. And he was very, very nice, and I felt really vindicated by him responding to me and was being nice enough to ask me more questions about what I saw. It was sometime around then that my reoccurring dream of what happened to me at camp stopped. And I started remembering, like I said, it was really close. Maybe it might have been maybe 2 or 3 days after I saw Standing's video that I emailed Dr. Meldrum, and my dreams stopped. And sometimes when I'm listening to these Bigfoot stories, I get little clips of memory in my head of what I saw. It's never going to change. He's never going to turn and face me. It was just that little turn, a little bit of a turn where I can barely see a little bit of its chest. It's never going to change, but I remember more detail. That's what's coming out in my head, whereas before I didn't. So coming forward, when Bigfoot Case Files narrated my story, I got a telephone call the next day from a cousin of mine that's 71. He was in the Vietnam War, and he said, so, you saw Bigfoot? And I said, "Oh, I haven't heard from you in a long time." I said, "What's up?" I said, "You listened to my narration." I said, "How did you know it was me?" He said, "I just knew." He said, "I just knew it was you. You described where you lived and that sort of thing. There was enough in there that I figured out it was you."
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of times when kids have encounters, it'll generally come out in nightmares and dreams, and I think it's just a human way of dealing with a traumatic event. Even though the creature didn't attack you, it's a traumatic event. It's like, what is this saying? And it's interesting, too, the behavior of the creature, and I find it, as you and I were talking earlier, Shirley, I was telling you that sometimes, they do snag kids, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. I think they snag kids and definitely kill them or do whatever. Because there's a lot of weird accounts where parents are walking down trails and the kid just vanishes. He's nowhere to be found. Yeah. And there's a lot of weird stories you can read of to where it kind of points towards these things. But then there's a lot of encounters where they don't, where they're just kind of curious. And like you said, you're really no threat. I mean, really, what are you going to do to it? It just kind of looked down at you. You're no threat. You didn't scream. You didn't really react. So there's no point in it reacting. And it probably left. Would you say it looked more human-like?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. If anyone listening will go and find Todd Standing's photo, it's the one that he uses the most, of the Bigfoot that's dark-skinned, dark hair, and just imagine all of the hair off the face basically the same, and just hair halfway down the forehead. That's human. To me, that was like, I don't understand. My brain was scrambled. It didn't understand how I could see this gigantic thing with exceptionally long arms way down below, way down like our arms. I'm standing up now. My arms are like at my thigh level, and this one was down by its knees, and it just. It didn't make sense in my head, but that's the face that I saw. And like I said, it was just too human, and I think that's what scrambles the brain. What confuses a lot of people is that they stop because it's human-looking in the face. Most of them. Some look like more a gorilla with plastic surgery done. I guess that's the only way I can describe it. But it didn't stop me throughout my adult years from going camping. I've camped in the Sequoia National Forest. I've camped up in Lake Alpine in California. That's not far from Bear Valley. I still did camping, but one of the things that I didn't do when I went camping is I didn't go to sleep until everybody else in camp was asleep. And that started with me, I think, probably in my late teens. And I couldn't remember why all of a sudden, when I used to be an early bird, now I'm a night owl. And I can't go to sleep until the whole house is asleep and quiet. And I don't know. I don't get that. But, at some point my brain will figure it out.
Well, I think it affects everyone in different ways, especially this encounter. Thank God it wasn't aggressive with you. And they are campsite robbers. I mean, they will come in and take your food, take your stuff in the middle of the night. And you probably caught this thing in the middle of the act. You guys were making marshmallows. You guys were, cooking up hot dogs. And you could probably smell that miles and miles away. And it probably brought them in to find out what's going on here. I'm ready to eat. And it was probably stolen through camp when you crawled out of your sleeping bag. And again, being a kid, I mean, really, you're no threat. There's really no sense. And, you made no motion. You didn't do anything. And I think a lot of times their behavior, not always, but most of the time, their behavior is reactionary. They'll react to what you're doing. If you scream,
that's what I've heard.
They'll scream. If you pull out a gun and point it at them, they're going to react. If you A lot of times, if you don't do anything, I think it throws them off. I don't think they're really not really sure how to react when you don't do anything. And I think in your situation, the fact that you didn't really put the light in its eyes, you just kind of crawled out, looked at it, you're probably half awake. It looked down at you, realized it had been caught. But then again, you're just a little kid. You're no threat, so there's really no sense in tormenting you or killing you. Or, it's probably why it wasn't there. It was probably there for food. It probably smelled the marshmallows, the s'mores you guys were cooking, the hot dogs you guys were cooking, and wanted to come in and get some food. That's probably what it was doing.
Yeah, I think so too. Also, I've thought about the fact that that's the place where they take the kids camping from Camp Green Meadows, science camp. That's probably the same place they take kids all the time, and it's learned that that's where food could be, or its family, or whatever it is. And I understand that, most people have said that they're nocturnal, and I think that they are as well, but, they're like us. I think they have learned to hide, and the best way to hide is to go shopping at night, so your friends don't see you without makeup on. So you do things at night that will keep you hidden from other people. And I bet it's gone through that same camp area that the kids camp out at all the time. And I don't know if anybody else has seen it, but I've thought about that throughout the years.
Yeah, and I think most people who have an encounter, I think that they will tell you about reoccurring dreams. They will tell you about reoccurring nightmares of these things. And, the fact that you were a little kid when this happened, it's over 50 years ago this happened. I could see it sticking with you through your dreams throughout the night, and trying, because like I said, it is a traumatic event. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. It doesn't exist, right? These things aren't out there,
Yeah.
And so I think if it would have been a bear or any other predator, it probably would have attacked you. Probably would have killed you.
Exactly, and I would have screamed bloody murder as soon as I've seen it, because I've camped throughout the years, and we have had bears, come into camp. We've put up our little bear alarm thing, and, it would wake us up in the middle of the night, and they're mostly juveniles, and I'm screaming bloody murder, bear, so I couldn't scream, because what was I going to scream? In my brain, what was I going to say? And also, I couldn't tell anybody, because number one, I'm in junior high, and junior high school kids are terrorists. They're terrible. That's the worst time of any kid's life, because we're all going through puberty and all this other crazy stuff, and it's just horrible. And I was smart enough to realize that I didn't want a labeled nickname that would label me as a crazy kid, or, because I know that could affect the rest of your life. I know people now whose nicknames labeled them for all of their life, and now they're in their late 50s and 60s, and they don't want you to say their nickname anymore. They want their adult name, because I think that nickname bothered them so much. So I was not about to tell anybody about this thing I saw, and I never did. The first person I told was my husband in 2000.
Yeah, it's amazing how it affects all of us, especially after you have an encounter. I want to ask you, Shirley, what do you think Sasquatch is? Let's say your grandson were to ask you, Gigi, what is Sasquatch? What would you say to him?
Well, I'll tell you what I told him. I told him, well, if you go and look up on your tablet, how much human DNA is in chimpanzees and how much human DNA is in gorillas. I said, so then you look that up. I think that Sasquatch has maybe 5%, like 99.5% of human DNA, because of the videos that I've watched and listened to and the calls and people talking about the gibberish, I think that they have undeveloped vocal cords because they, maybe not vocal cords, but some sort of sound box because they can mimic so many different creatures, like a parrot or any other bird that can talk. They can mimic and they can learn. And because they've learned throughout history to stay away from man, and they've learned which berries and plants that they can eat. And, like you can teach chimps and gorillas how to sign language and how to use a brush to paint. I believe these creatures are our next in line cousin. You've got chimps, you got gorillas, then I think you have them with that very small percentage, as close to us as possible, of humans because of their faces. And I still think that they're in the great ape family, but they're our first cousin. That's what I think that they are, but not human. The first cousin in the ape family. And my grandson went and he looked all this up, and he came back to me some hours later and said, "So Grandma," he said, "so you think that even though they're like gorilla type people, they're just big gorilla type people that's like really, really, close to us, like my cousin Brian is close to me." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "But your cousin Brian is a human being. So imagine your cousin Brian being a gorilla." And he had this thoughtful look on his head. He was kind of puzzled. I said, "Just keep looking it up. You'll figure it out." So that's what I think that they are. They're our first cousin, but in the ape family.
Interesting. Very interesting answer. Although I have a few family members I could probably classify as gorillas. I'll probably have to edit that out. But anyway, it's I understand what you're saying. And there is situations like that. There's other situations where they don't look human at all. They look more like a monkey or a chimpanzee, but they do have human characteristics. But I've heard a lot of encounters where hunters have them in their crosshairs, and they will not pull the trigger because they are afraid they're going to be brought down on murder charges. And I've talked to a lot of those guys, and I'll ask them, "Was it human?" And they'll say, "No, it was not a human." And I'll say, "Why didn't you pull the trigger?" And they're like, "Well, it looked human. It had human characteristics. It had expressions that were like human-like. So I had a hard time just executing something just to execute something," which I respect that. I understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
But, you could be right. They could definitely be an offshoot of us, because there is a lot of people. I mean, I know you listen to the show, and thank you for listening, but I know a lot of people come on and they will say, you take all the hair off that thing and it looks like a giant human. And so it makes you really wonder, what are these things? Really, what are these things? And why the different behavioral, why does one act one way and then another one, like the one you came across? It could care less you were there. Might have been curious to figure out what you were or why you were looking at it, but it wasn't really going to attack you. It wasn't going to kill you. It really wasn't there for that purpose. And then in other situations where people come across these things, they act like they want to kill us for no reason. And so maybe it is more animalistic, but they do have some. I'm glad you brought up the chimpanzee, because I think you're right. I think a chimpanzee has like 98% of the same DNA we have. And there's a very small difference in their DNA as opposed to us. So it is kind of fascinating to look into it and figure out what these things are. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing it, over 50 years later, sharing this encounter and taking the time to come on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. But, I do have a comment about why certain people have had certain experiences. And I thought, okay, in my hypothesis, if they're like our first cousins, they react to us how their experiences have been in their life, just like we react to our environment based on our own experiences. And, maybe, I don't want to go to a certain store because I was treated horribly by them years and years ago, and maybe I'm not ready to go back there. Or, I don't want to watch these type of movies because they really bother me and I can't sleep at night. And I believe that I think, around the country, just like us, there are different ones around the country, and through their different experiences with human beings around the country, it shapes them as they get older to how they react to us when they see them. Now, as a human being, if you're walking in, down the road and somebody raises a gun, you know how you're going to react. Or someone has a stick in their arm, in their hand, and they look like they're going to hit you. You know how you're going to react. You instinctively know when something is a threat. Or if I see a black widow spider and it's on its way into my house, I'm going to kill it because that's a bad thing. And so I feel like in their environment, in their territory, when they've had bad experiences with people before, and they couldn't get somebody to leave by throwing rocks or doing whatever else they do to harass us to get us to leave, and they've had a bad experience, if they run across someone in their territory, that person is the one that's going to get the really bad experience from them. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, I understand completely what you mean. I guess it is kind of human nature. I mean, I have a good friend of mine. I wouldn't say he's a great friend, but he's a friend of mine. And he's basically a racist. And one time I asked him, I said, what is your deal? I don't understand why you like this. And he was robbed when he was younger by a black guy. I guess it's more politically correct to say African American. And I was like,
we're all kinds. You just depend.
Well, and it's like I told him, I was like, so you don't like all African American? Not everyone's like that. Not every white guy is like that. Not every Asian guy is like that. You can't judge your experience, your one-time experience with someone, and then blanket everyone across the board. So I guess, and maybe that's a really terrible example. I probably shouldn't even said that. But what I'm saying is, I understand what you're saying. I mean, you can't judge. But I guess it's human nature for us to do that. It's I walk into a bar and I have a shaved head and I have tattoos and I'm a big guy, and I've had white supremacists come up to me and start talking to me like we're old friends, and I'm like, I'm not with you guys. I'm not in the same. You guys are on a different planet than I'm on. You guys need to go. But maybe it's their experience. That you see a white guy with shaved head, tattoos, he must be a white supremacist. He must be one of our brothers. And then they find out really quick, I'm not. I got nothing to do with their feelings, or I want nothing to do with that. And so I guess it is human nature. Maybe that's another terrible example, but I guess it is human nature that, and maybe with these things, you're right. It's sometimes when dogs are abused by a male, they'll love female humans, but they hate males. They hate all males. So, maybe you're onto something there. Maybe I'll throw all my terrible examples. Maybe you're onto something there.
No, I've thought, once, like I said, my brain exploded. Once I saw that video and saw that face, I've thought a lot about it, and I've listened to hundreds of different YouTube stations of people's experiences and stories, and watching, investigations. And, one of the, it's kind of crazy, but one of my favorite things to do is when I have an interest in something, I will research it until I can't go anymore, even though that's not my vocation. But it's something that I love to do because I always, I wanted to be an investigative reporter. And back when I was coming up, the local newspaper editor said, it's just not the right time for Negroes to, to get into newspaper reporting. Maybe if you lived in a different city on the East Coast. Well, I wasn't going anywhere, but it didn't deter me from just doing some of the things that I love doing. you're right. People, we're just human beings, and people get confused by me because I'm a tomboy, but I look like a girly girl, and I drive a pickup truck with a toolbox, and I have my own set of tools.
My kind of lady.
And I can fish, and I can set traps, and I have my, like I said, I have my tattoos. So if, I can fit in wherever I needed to fit in. If I had long sleeves on and pants, you wouldn't know, because it's different. So when people when they meet me and they get to know me, they're like, you're an oddity, because you look like you belong in the glamour world, and like you would be driving the top of the line Lexus. And I said, no, that's my husband. He's the one that is into all of that. And that was the kind of man I wanted to attract. But I knew that, being the girly girl was how I was going to get the kind of man I wanted. And then he was going to have to accept who I was on the inside, and that part of me that was mostly hidden from the world, until I got tired of it. And I said, I'm going to be retiring, so Shirley, just start letting it all come out. People always knew that I went camping. They always knew I knew how to fish, which was a surprise to a lot of people.
Yeah, I hear you. And like I said, Shirley, I mean, it's you're my kind of lady. I mean, that's it is an oddity, and I'm glad. I think as us humans, I think racism and all that stuff is learned behavior, because you don't see little kids acting that way. But I think sometimes with these things, I don't know that they're so much human. I think I agree with you. I think they're more animal-like in their behavior. Mm-hmm. And sometimes with an animal, you never know quite what it's going to do. Animals are not predictable. They can turn on you in a moment. And when you think a situation, it's like people who have chimpanzees as pets, most loving pet you ever saw in your life. Then one day that animal snaps and rips your face off. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how it is with these things. I think that they can turn on you in a dime. I think that they are they always aggressive? No. Will they always attack you? No. But there is that chance that it could happen, with these things, and so I don't know how we got off on race and stuff. That was probably my fault. But with these things,
we were discussing the different attitudes of Sasquatch,
that's right.
Why some attack and why some don't, and maybe even why some observe people. And I believe that they learned something has happened to them as they have grown and they've learned, or maybe they've been taught by their parents. If you see, a human, steer clear, or if you're confronted, fight.
Yeah, you could be right. You definitely could be right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Shirley, and sharing the encounter, some 50 some odd years later. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks again, Shirley. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Until next time, everyone.